All right. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in or creeping into evening. Thanks so much for joining us for our webinar entitled, as you can see, Long COVID in the Workplace. During the event today, we're going to, of course, discuss the challenges that long COVID patients face in the workplace and how employers can support them. We also will have a legal input as well if you're having trouble getting benefits. We'll have that as well. My name's John Lieberman. I'm excited to join today's event as the moderator. I have been doing TV and radio for a very long time, long before I was gray. And so I was super pleased to be asked to join as the moderator today. You're going to hear some really powerful stories and hopefully come away with some really useful information that you can use. Before we get to our panelists, I do have a few reminders. This will be recorded, so you'll get a copy of the event recording. So don't worry if you miss something or have to go get a cup of coffee. If you have a question for the panelists, we'd ask you please use the Q&A feature to send it to us. We do have captions available as well, so you'll need to activate those captions through the menu on the bottom of your screen. We're going to kick off the session today with a short video to share some firsthand experience of some long COVID patients, including many of those that you are going to meet in a moment when we introduce the panel. So allow me to share my screen and we will start with this video. And it's very short, and then we'll be right back.
Once I got sick, everything changed.
And because of long COVID, I became disabled. I lost my job, my health insurance. I had to learn how to walk.
The life that I had known prior to becoming ill with COVID-19 is gone.
I spend much of my life on the sofa or in bed. My kids miss their dad, the personality that I had before.
Now I am completely disabled. It's hard for me to sit up, which is why I'm, lying down doing this video.
Very powerful and clearly just a very small smattering of the thousands and tens of thousands and millions of people going through long COVID right now. I want to introduce the panel. Actually, I want them to introduce themselves because they can do a better job than I can, beginning with Sam. Sam, if you would give us just a quick 15-20 second introduction of yourself, please.
Thanks, John. Hi, I'm Sam Marpel. I am a former retail chief digital officer, and I have had long COVID for, it'll be 24 months in about a month. So just at the end of this December, it'll be 2 years. I got it during the holidays of 2021.
Thank you, Sam. Let's go to Carrie. Carrie?
Hi, my name is Carrie McCrossin, and I am a kidney transplant coordinator. And I contracted COVID early on. First waiver, got it in March of 2020, and I've been having long COVID symptoms ever since.
Thank you, Carrie. And Ty?
Great, thanks, John, and Andrew. Thanks for pulling this important session together today. My name is Ty Godwin. I am a former software sales executive in the telecommunications industry. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I'm part of the OG, first wave of long COVID So it will be 4 years for me in January coming up.
The battle continues. Thank you, Ty. And we'll get back to everybody in just a second. I want to introduce Andrew. He is the president and the co-founder of Pandemic Patients, an amazing organization. Andrew is a lawyer who specializes in health, disability, and employment law and policy. He leads the organization, and in case you didn't know, provides pro bono legal assistance to people with long COVID to help enforce their rights in the workplace and get them disability and other public assistance benefits when they're unable to work. So we're going to do a deeper dive with Andrew in just a few moments, but we're certainly glad that he's here and certainly glad that he started this organization. I want to get back to the group. And again, if anybody in the audience has questions, please put them in the Q&A function, and we'll certainly get to those. But I'm going to start with you, Sam. Could you describe a little bit about how your long COVID symptoms interfered with your ability to work? Because you were a C-suite executive.
So for me, my acute infection really blurred into my long COVID infection. There was no period where I got better and then I started to get sick again, where some long COVID patients have a period where they feel better. I just continued to get sicker and sicker. And that's probably a little bit to my own doing. I think when you're at that level in your career, coming off of the holidays, we were launching a new product. I felt that I needed to work through being ill, and I did that. And so, to the best of my ability, I think I come from the generation that, or generations above me as well, that it's a badge of honor that you work through being sick, and that it shows how dedicated you are to your job. And I just, did that during the acute phase, where I had a ton of support from my peers, my boss, my CEO, and from my team. And I was to the point where I was sleeping, I was getting up at 6 a.m., working for a couple hours in the morning, then going to sleep for a couple hours, getting up, working, and trying to maintain this pace at the same time, really very, very ill. Then I started developing new symptoms. Go ahead.
Yeah. And no, I was going to say, Sam, you talk about pushing through. And I think that's a great segue to all of the first responders who had to push through. And that includes Carrie. Carrie, tell us a little bit about how your symptoms started to interfere with your very important job.
Thanks, John. It's very similar to Sam as far as your dedication. You're a healthcare provider, or, you work in healthcare, and there was a pandemic, and, we were preparing for it. And it was so early on, when I tested positive, that it was sort of just kind of like we were still almost in the setup phase of just preparing for this onslaught that we were preparing for of patients, and what we were going to do and how it was going to actually progress and whatnot. And, it's that, oh gosh, I feel sick. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And then it turned into, oh yes, I am. And I'm a little different than Sam. My initial COVID was not that horrific. I did my quarantine, but I developed a lung infection and pneumonia. And from that point on, it sort of deep dove into some neurological stuff. And it wasn't, oh, I forgot the pan was cooking. It was the underwear went over the scrubs. No, that's not how it works. That's not how you get dressed. It was that intense. And it became very obvious, starting to go back into work I had asthma and breathing. Now, I worked out all the time. I could not do it. And it was difficult, to kind of, I pushed through things. I could stay up and take call all night. I could not do that. So it was very much a yes, you will listen to me, for my body, to myself. And my body went, no, you will not. So it was a little difficult on that end, because I couldn't push through. And I also knew colleagues were sicker, or, patients needed help. And it's a hard part where you have to just kind of sit back and say, okay, I'm sick, and I am not going to push myself because it's not going to do any good, but symptom wise, I dipped a little bit and got a lot worse neurologically. And I do think that actually became a lot worse because I did that.
Carrie, you were going to an
go
office.
ahead.
I was going to say,
In an office
Carrie,
and
you were
hospital.
going to the hospital while you were
Correct.
sick.
Yeah.
And for me, being an office person, John, if you recall back in 2021, I mean, we were still in a lockdown phase, many of us that could still work remotely. So I was still in a at-home work remotely setting. So I wasn't in this stage where Carrie was, where she was going into an office and exposing herself. I was able to quarantine from my team, but yet I was still trying to work a 60+ hour a week job. And I
that's
couldn't keep up with
interesting.
it.
It's interesting because in some ways, Ty, I think when you're able to work from home, you're almost able to hide it a little bit more about how sick you actually are than perhaps Carrie could, because obviously she was in front of patients all the time. Ty, talk us through, the progression of your symptoms and what ultimately led you to apply for disability.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because I think it's also something that's still misleading the public today, and that they feel that you've got to have a hospitalization that would lead to something like long COVID, and that's absolutely not the case. Mine was a very mild onset. I was traveling globally extensively January, February of 2020, and I thought I had what was a garden variety flu or virus, and the news of COVID was just coming out of China, so it didn't even connect in my brain that, hey, this is COVID. Like Sam, I worked through being sick, so I started seeing specialists in February, March, and I just got progressively worse. In fact, I worked through what ultimately was a 100-day fever. And I usually get a lot of head shakes of, well, you mean 100-degree fever? And I'm like, yeah, 100 degrees for 100 days. So that kind of speaks to this type A, societal thing that we push ourselves too hard. I think I pushed myself in athletics early on. I was supposed to race with a special needs kid in March of that year. The world shut down. I wound up virtually running the race for him, and I completely crashed the next day. And that's when I knew I was really sick.
Yeah, Ty, thank you for sharing that. And we will get to the questions in the Q&A in just a bit. I know there's one from Kayla. If anybody else has questions, please put them in. But before we get there, Sam, what is it like psychologically when you have to stop working finally due to long COVID? What is that like, that feeling of, I would imagine, helplessness, particularly if your full-time job becomes battling to get benefits from either your employer or the government or etc.?
Well, I didn't stop working until May, the end of May of 2022. So I hung in there as long as I could. In fact, my vestibular therapist said to me that working was beneficial to my recovery and my therapy, because she felt that it was good both for my mental health, but also for many of the symptoms that I had. I was struggling with sitting at the computer. I was struggling with looking at the computer. I could no longer sort puzzle pieces. I was struggling with basic math. I was triggering a migraine every few days, every few hours, depending upon when it was. And I started losing my speech around the period of April. So it was very, very, I was fighting it along the way. And then finally I asked my employer if I could go part-time. But for me, I needed health benefits because I was the primary earner for my family and responsible for our family's benefits. And where we landed was, because we were a startup, was that I could not go part-time and maintain my benefits. So I was forced basically to go on short-term disability. And I felt like I was going kicking and screaming. And when I finally got to short-term disability, I was told, like, oh, think of it as a vacation and you'll get better. And for me, my life shattered. My whole identity came apart. Everything I knew about myself, who I was as a person, who I had been for over, almost 30 years since was gone. Graduating from high school almost 30 years prior, and then to end up in a place where you can literally not even do things you were doing as a high school graduate, you don't know who you are anymore. And it was devastating.
And I know, Ty, you said, go ahead.
I was just, I understand what Sam was saying as far as, identity crisis, sort of, because as a coordinator, my job was intense, and it becomes your identity, because that's basically, you live and breathe it. You think it, is that person going to be okay? It kind of blurs into your personal life, healthcare wise, as far as just, the motor doesn't stop. And so you're constantly thinking about, you're abandoning everyone. And then you lose, then you're just so emotionally involved, and then you're not. And it's a swift cutoff, and it's very difficult. And at the same time, family wise, my son was going to college. I have one child. And it was like that transition from mom to a kid who lives at home to mom, like dropping a child off. And it was like empty nest, lose your identity as a career person. And it's like, who am I? Because I could not exercise. I couldn't have, friends and do functions. So it was very difficult to figure out who Carrie is at that point. It's difficult when everything's gone at once and you can't process, and you can't even move through, like if you exercise to kind of work through things or difficulties, or if that's how you cleared your brain, you couldn't do that. And your brain couldn't clear for any reason. There was nothing that you could do.
And Ty, speaking of things being gone, you then have to convince somebody or groups of people that indeed long COVID has led you to this point and not something else. Can you talk about kind of the energy that it took to convince whomever it might be that that your ailments were indeed caused by long COVID?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Of course, people that knew how I was wired, I was wired to be an entrepreneur in grade school. So it's not like I just woke up one morning and said, you know what, I don't think I want to work hard anymore or excel in athletics, because I excelled in work, but then I chased, being a marathon runner and triathlete. And then I graduated to work racing with a Team Hoyt special needs kid. Like Sam described, that was a good part of what defined me as an individual. And it literally went away overnight. So trust me, the having to explain or, I guess even in my own mind, especially early on, because people were like, well, you don't look sick, and trust me, this is a very invisible illness, because where you may not be in a hospital bed or a wheelchair does not mean that, what I would describe as, my baseline is what most normal people would call into sick every day. And there's all the neurological and heart and lung and cognitive issues that pile on top of that. So, it's been an evolution. I think people And it's still very much research phase, but people are, I think, now starting to understand, hey, there's some really sick people as a result of this once in 100-year pandemic.
Carrie, speaking of, sick people and working, how can employers collaborate with their employees to make sure that they are receiving the support that they need? For example, what supports did you use, and what could you have benefited from that you didn't have access to?
Early on, I think that there was so much of, and medically, psychologically, you're not going to say you can't do something. It's just a mindset that should probably around mental health and the stigma, especially around healthcare workers. It's a weakness in a way. And that's something that this has actually taught me is to me, that's actually strength and power in your vulnerability. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of anyone else. And we have to look out for each other. And I think there was such a need for staff, and that superseded if you were really okay. And there was a lot of times that I was not okay, and it was visible. I couldn't breathe. I was wheezing. I had a nebulizer machine sitting next to me. So that was an obvious sign, but yet it was still, she'll be fine. We'll be okay. And there was not much leading up to, let's start talking about the possibility of you not being able to stay here, or what could we do to keep you somewhat here longer. There's not a lot of information, even in the hospital, about what FMLA entails or what it would look like, because I don't really know if that's something emphasized within a medical profession, of that you're not going to be there when you're supposed to, because it doesn't close, right? I mean, you have Christmas and stuff, we're on call, we're working. It doesn't shut. So there's not a day when you're like, okay, that's covered. At least you have 4 days of a breather. There's nothing like that. So it becomes a situation of taking care of your workers in the hospital and the patients, and then you throw a pandemic in the middle of it. And it was somewhat of a problem, obviously, because they needed us there as well. And it was not really provided early on,
And we're going to get to kind of the legal side of this in just a few minutes with Andrew, what employees need to know, what employers should know. But before we get to him, Sam, same question for you. Kind of what supports did you use? What could you have benefited from? And where were the gaps?
For me, I definitely relied on the flexible work schedule and working from home. That was huge. And the support of both the team that reported into me was amazing, and my extended teams that I worked with from an agency setting. I had a number of folks that worked with me that still valued my brain and what I brought to the table at the time. That was so amazing, that really encouraged me in a way that was so important to my mental health at the time. And what's very interesting, and I don't know if it's the same, if Ty experiences the same thing, but today my disability is one of my disabilities. I have many, but is my memory loss. But what is crazy is that my memory pre getting sick is very much intact. I mean, I could probably rattle off, numbers and budget numbers from 2019 and 2018 and from clients back in 2012. Yet I don't maybe even remember that I went to see my mother-in-law, or the pajamas that I bought my son, for last year's holiday. And then I bought it again on clearance, apparently last February as well, that I just discovered. So, it's just did I give my dog her medicine today? Did I let the dogs in when I was supposed to, or did I fall asleep and take a nap, or did I turn off the stove? I mean, it's the degree of disability of the current memory loss is huge, but the value that was recognized then was also very important. the bigger issue became for me once I had lost my job. And I do understand that it is very hard to have a C-suite executive who was in the situation that I was in. And I do understand very much that when you are leading a team of people on some very important big projects, it's very difficult for organizations to be, it's a difficult place for everyone to be in. But I did not know if I would qualify for long-term disability benefits, the benefits that I had been paying into for years, for 3 months. And that was devastating. And it was so challenging to me with the brain that I was operating with. And I joke to this day, every time I say it, Andrew has read my policy even more and more times, and he probably has, but he read my policy so many times to help me understand if I would still qualify for the disability insurance. It's only paying me a third of the income that we were living on as a family. And if I didn't have that, I mean, I don't know what we would be doing. And that's a challenge.
There are some questions I want to get to in a second, but Ty, let me ask you this. Clearly, there are people viewing this right now who are suffering through long COVID as well. What would your message be, Ty, to anyone suffering from long COVID out there now? And the second part of the question is, what would your message be to employers?
Sure. We were joking about it on the pre-call that much of my advice would require a flux capacitor and a DeLorean and time travel on things that people should have done, when they went to work, or even in your 20s. I literally can recall the guy that sold me my term life insurance policy. And I thought, well, I would never need that beyond the age of, 50 or 60. So I bought what I thought was accurate at the time. And he also tried to sell me a long-term disability policy, and I didn't think I needed it. So I think, for people with long COVID now, I would say, absolutely engage HR the moment you feel you've got long COVID, and have the discussion with them. If you haven't filed for FMLA, that should be the very first high priority for you, because that allows for your employer to give you accommodations, and it gives you those accommodations. And they may or may not work for you. For me, FMLA ended pretty quickly, and realizing that my job required full-time travel around the world, and I could no longer do that. So I very quickly filed for short-term disability. But I think that last piece is pay attention to those benefits enrollment period you're in right now. And if you have the opportunity to turn up the nozzle on any of those benefits, make sure they have adequate coverage, or get them private market.
I'm going to piggyback on you.
I just want to add
that. Yeah.
I wanted to add to that too, Carrie.
Carrie,
Carrie,
go ahead, and then Sam.
I actually suggest anyone, if you test positive, as soon as you test positive, start talking to HR before you actually realizing there are symptoms of long COVID. Because to me personally, I feel like prevention is the best thing that you can do. And if that starts the process, as soon as you know you're positive, if and when you become feeling like long COVID may be an issue, you've already started that process. Because I know for me, it would be a little bit overwhelming to have cognitive issues, and then the packets and paperwork, and trying to speak to, HR and whatnot. So whatever the policies that you have in place, I would start as soon as you know you're positive. That's
That's great advice. Sam?
I was just gonna, build upon what Ty was saying, is that, I have led many people that are in their 20s that have chosen not to sign up for short-term disability and long-term disability to save just a couple dollars for a paycheck. And I understand why you might think that you don't need it. But you do need that. It's no longer even if you need it because you might fall down and break your leg and need surgery. It's really critical that you have it now with COVID floating around, especially knowing that, 1 in 10 COVID cases leads to long COVID. So the more times you get COVID, the higher your likelihood of getting long COVID exists. And to build upon what Carrie said is if you test positive on a rapid test, to go get a PCR test, because you are going to need that later for insurance purposes as well. And many, many folks from earlier in the pandemic that don't have PCR tests with positive tests showing it on a PCR test have struggled getting adequate medical care for that as well.
And for those of you who aren't following along in the Q&A, Richard brings out a good point and says part of the problem is Congress not fully funding Social Security Administration, which is why there are long delays. So write, call, or email your local and federal elected officials about Social Security and long COVID. And also, Jordan wrote, currently unemployed, how do you get back into the workforce if you're very ill? And Andrew's advice was your local vocational rehabilitation agency might have some good resources that you can utilize as well. Sam, did you have something to say on that?
Yeah, I just want to just warn people to not rely on your Social Security disability insurance as your primary disability insurance that you're going to think you want to qualify for. I can tell you that that is also a third of what I qualify for with my employer-based disability plan. And my disability plan, employer-based disability plan, actually takes my Social Security disability. So it's not additive. Where I'm saying is you need to get an employer-based disability plan or a private-based insurance plan. Your Social Security disability plan will not cover a mortgage or your rent. You will need more than that. And it does take a long time to qualify for it. It does take a long time to qualify for it. And there is the Stop the Wait Act, which is a whole nother topic we can cover another time, but definitely you're going to want more than that because you do not want to live on the poverty level. And many
we're going to get to totally. And we're going to get to Andrew in just 2 minutes about, what employees need to know, employers. But before we do, I want to ask you each one question. And that is, as difficult as this has been, I've spent enough time with each of you, virtually to know that you each have moments of hopefulness moving forward. They may be few and far between, but you do have moments of hopefulness. So I want to ask each of you, how do you muster the strength to at times be hopeful, and what are you hopeful happens here? Ty, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It took my wife and I a long time, and my family a long time, for me to get to a spot where we kind of accepted the life we had, with a broken immune system. I now have stage 3 cancer that's brand new, and we're having to deal with that on top of long COVID. So, but I would say those with long COVID, there's a path, and there's a playbook, and there can be resources out there to help you, get, back to a slice of normalcy in life.
Thank you, Ty. Carrie, what about you?
I think, yes, I've hit my knees more times than I thought, would ever be possible. But I also think equally there is people that you meet, like Andrew, and just that I wrote his name on a sticky note. I couldn't remember why. And then I saw him on a webinar like that day. And it's like, oh, now I know why I put your name on a sticky note. I think just in general, the kindness of people and to be believed. And just knowing that there are people that are willing to help you that don't know you. So you see a kindness in humanity that you weren't seeing prior, or that you didn't see, or you're banging up against so many different obstacles to be believed, to get that stigma of you're just 49 and anxiety perimenopausal. No, something's happening. So there were so many walls that I hit, that to actually see a person believe you, you're gonna make me cry then, and have enough faith in you to actually go to bat. It's the things I hold on to. And just that we're all so connected just shows you how different we are, but how alike we are. And so I think if we focus on that, and I think too, as a world, we have a great opportunity to come together to help each other, and that's something, I don't know, and that's something that, is just needs to be highlighted more, that we have an opportunity as a human, as an entire world, to actually do something for each other instead of for ourselves. So.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I do believe that's why Andrew, co-founded Pandemic Patients, simply to help and provide assistance to those struggling so much. And Sam, how do you remain hopeful in the dark days?
So about a year ago at this time, I really, really was struggling, really struggling. One thing that many of us struggle with is suicidal ideation. And I'll be one of the first to admit that I really, really was there. I just did not feel that I had any worthwhile left. And as I started to come out of that and had decided that I wanted to be able to help other people, I think it was maybe February, Andrew and I were going for a walk. We had met each other in person finally. And I said to him, I just wish you could have known the old me. And he said to me, then you wouldn't have met me. And all of a sudden, this light bulb went on in my head for the first time. And I realized that if it weren't for getting COVID, that all of the wonderful people that I've met on this journey since then, I never would have met. And that for some reason, this had to have happened to me for a reason, for better or for worse. And that there has to be purpose. And I just have to find purpose to this journey. And since then, and I have to admit, it has included some very good antidepressants, not going to lie, and being willing to accept that help. Because we also struggle from a lot of cognitive issues. But I, this summer, was able to find joy in little things. Tomato plants, my dogs, being available for when my daughter calls or texts from college in the middle of the day that I never could have been as an executive. I never played that role.
She was wondering why you didn't pick up the phone. She was wondering why you didn't used to pick up the phone, Sam. And now there's no excuse.
Now there's no excuse. I mean, I still spend 60 to 80% of my time in bed. I think Carrie and I want you to know we do not look like this most of the time. Right before I got here, I took off my Star Wars flannel PJs and put on a little makeup for you.
I want to get to a couple questions for you all because I think they're going to be important. Let's start with Tom. Tom, you have a question for the group?
I'm gonna have to let him talk. You should be unmuted now, Tom.
Hey guys, I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Tom Costello. I don't have long COVID, but Ty is a childhood friend, and he and I go way back. I'm a correspondent for NBC News, but I am not calling on behalf of NBC News. I'm just tuning in as a friend and as somebody who is very concerned about my friend Ty and all of you. My question was going to be, I mean, first of all, have you now found that people are starting to believe you, are starting to recognize that this is significant and serious? And second of all, I think maybe Sam just answered it. I was going to ask, do any of you feel like you're getting better? And it sounds like maybe not so much. And I don't think Ty is feeling a whole heck of a lot better, especially with the new diagnosis. But that's it. It's again, I don't have long COVID, but I worry for all of you, and I'm trying to understand it better as we continue to do our reporting at NBC News.
Thank you, Tom. And I think those are very insightful questions. And Carrie, are you feeling any better, to Tom's point?
There are moments, but there are also moments that I'm absolutely worse. And I think to answer a little bit, or to go into a little bit more of Tom's question, is that it's a disguisable disease, and a lot of testing is not valid, or it doesn't fit the box that we are in, because we're all in different situations. And just because the test is not prove anything doesn't mean the symptoms aren't there. And you would think at this point we would be farther, but we're not. And also too, there are a lot of situations where you have PT ordered and you are getting worse from that. And that absolutely cut my career short by eons, because that's what they're telling you to do. And you're getting worse. But in your mind, because you've lost trust in yourself. You lost trust in the fact that, am I feeling this? Because everyone else is telling you you're not. So you have to pause and say, am I making this up? No, something's wrong, but you don't trust yourself anymore. But you end up having what they call post-exertional malaise, which is, to me, the killer of this. It's a constant chase. So Sam and I were joking, we hope we're not down for the count after this for how many days, because we're sitting up for this webinar, which is worth it. And you have to constantly go, and I am not joking at this point, Christmas is how far away? How far or how long? What do I have to do before then so I could maybe see my family? That's coming in from out of state. So it's hard to actually do that,
Sam, Tom had an interesting question too that hopefully can help inform some reporting at the network. And that is, are more people believing you now?
So for me, I was probably a little bit of a different bag. I don't feel, for the most part, that I was never not believed. I mean, I had some shitty gaslighting doctors too, but I pretty much went into my GP and was like, look, I think I have long COVID and I'm trying to get into Penn's long COVID program. And she said, okay, great. So I pretty much took, like my personality, type A, took everything, bull by the horns and said, this is it. And pretty much led that way. But what I find is there's a lack of understanding, maybe, to the seriousness of, if I get reinfected, what that really means to me. And the people that are near and dear to me will ask me to go to a restaurant. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? Like, please. And I can't tell if they're just asking me because it's wishful thinking and they're being nostalgic and they mean it lovingly. But deep down, it really hurts me. And so what I see is denialism, or this maybe this feeling that, oh, this just happened to you, but it won't happen to me or any of us. So I didn't go to my family's Thanksgiving. I was home by myself. I sent my husband and my kids away. And that is the loneliness of what long COVID is, because the world has moved on without us, and we have to make very strategic decisions of when we choose to join the real world. And when we choose to join, it is with the decision, a conscious decision of, this could be the thing that I do again that could make me worse. and ultimately could make me feel worse than I've ever felt again. And to Tom, to answer your question, I have gotten better. I was at the worst I ever was in June of 2022. I think I've lost since August, of 2021, 38 pounds. Since October, I was already trying to lose weight, 25 pounds. I've not put on any of that weight, but I'm physically stronger, but I've plateaued and I've not gotten better from there. And that's the thing. I'm just on this, like what Carrie kind of called that, like cycle of nauseous migraines every day, have a good day, and then have 5 bad days.
I have
Well,
seizure
Ty, you
activity
have an
on top of that
amazing.
too, so.
Sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
No, I was saying, on top of that, I have seizure activity as well, and have to
Oh.
take the medications. So that's difficult, in that aspect as well. As far as sometimes they work, sometimes the medicine does not work at all, and I don't know why. So there's a lot of not knowing that is involved.
Well, Ty, you have an amazing friend there in Tom, but you of course already know that. Let's get to Renee. Renee has a question. Andrew, if we can unmute Renee.
I think Renee put her hand down, but Renee, if you wanted to
Oh.
ask a question, if you could put your hand back up, we'll call on you.
All right. While we wait for Renee, thank you all very much for all of these good questions, comments. I want to get to Andrew now. As I mentioned at the top, Andrew is a co-founder of Pandemic Patients. He is an attorney, one of the best minds when it comes to helping people that have long COVID secure benefits and obtain disability. And so, Andrew, I want to start with, somebody used the word playbook a little earlier in the conversation and said that at least we have a playbook now for long COVID. Can you talk a little bit about what the playbook is for employees?
Right. So one thing that came up before that a lot of people touched on was, you really need to understand what resources are available to you. And for most employees, that's going to start with really understanding what's in your employee handbook, because that's where your employer is going to put all of their policies for reasonable accommodations, your disability insurance policies, any additional medical leave policies, how to request your FMLA leave. And that's the best place to start. So I have a lot of people that I've helped where they don't quite understand what's in that employee handbook. And the first step they need to take is to request that from their employer and start to review it. And that's going to lead them to understanding, well, what's in their disability insurance policy, what's required to apply for those benefits, what does an appeal look like, or how do they have a conversation with their employer about reasonable accommodations. So that's one of the most important things that I would say right now that everyone can do is get a copy of your employee handbook and give it a scan, look for those important sections about disability, health, and medical leave. And, as Sam, I think you mentioned earlier, we're in open enrollment right now. And that is an incredibly important time for everyone because some people might not know if they have disability insurance coverage, or they might not have it, and this is their chance to get it. To enroll in that coverage. So I encourage everyone to take a really good look at the benefits that are available to you and find what is just right for your situation. So for some people, you might have the option of more robust disability coverage, or you might want to get more robust health insurance coverage or life insurance coverage. Now is the time to do that. So something else that Sam touched on, I think Carrie, you touched on it too, is you're going to need medical documentation. If you were to become disabled by long COVID, you don't want to regret not getting that PCR test because you're suddenly having a hard time proving that you had COVID or that your symptoms are caused by COVID. And that starts a long journey for a lot of people of getting the right documentation they need to substantiate their disability. So when you file for disability, you're going to have to prove to a completely different company that administers those benefits that you are disabled, that you are impaired, that the long COVID has impacted your ability to work, it's reduced your functional capacity, And at that moment, you can't work anymore. And that is a long, difficult process for a lot of people. And it's more difficult, number one, because they don't quite understand what they need to do on their end for that process, because for a lot of people, they've never done that before. That's a pretty common experience. You know, with disability, it's something it happens to you once. And with long COVID, it might happen to you unexpectedly in your prime working years. So the best thing you can do right now is to understand what you would need to do in that process. So getting the medical documentation also, it can be challenging because the doctors, we're still learning with this. You know, we don't have really good tests right now that can say, you have long COVID, it was caused by this COVID infection, and this is exactly how it's impairing your ability to work. So you have to be very proactive about gathering that medical documentation and you know, making a good argument to that insurance company when you apply for benefits, you know, exactly the nature of your disability. And as all of our panelists have mentioned, that can be hard because of the cognitive symptoms. You know, multitasking, memory, focus, those are all things that suddenly you can't potentially rely on in the way that you used to. And that's when a lot of people really need additional help. And that's where at Pandemic Patients, we try to step in to make sure people have the support they need to work through that process. So John, you know, the other side of this question is what others can do. And, you know, that's a really big thing here. So number one that I think we've all touched on is you need to believe your employees. No one wants long COVID, I can assure you. But approaching a situation of disability with one of your employees from a position of skepticism or doubt is super unproductive. And you need to have a very open dialogue with them about what they're going through and how you can help. So you can take some time to learn more about long COVID. I think everyone attending today has learned a lot about how this impacts people. But I think a lot of employers out there need to take a little bit more time to understand how this is a piece. And the last point I'll touch on here has to do with the patient's process. Come up with a plan now about what you could do to support your employees if they become diagnosed with a chronic illness like long COVID, and do a little bit of pre-work to understand what kind of modifications might be available to people who work for you based on the nature of their occupation, and also how you know, the long COVID symptoms specifically could interfere with people's ability to work and fulfill their job responsibilities. And that comes down to, number one, making sure you have a really good process in place for requesting a reasonable accommodation. So an employee should be able to look in their handbook and see, this is the structure around this. This is how you have this conversation. This is the process. So you want to be very clear about what that would look like, and then be very proactive with your employees to work with them collaboratively and productively through that process to make sure they get the support that they need based on their occupation.
And also too, your reasonable accommodation would change. It doesn't always stay the same because your symptoms change. So you may actually have to adjust that, which is not very easy because it's not understandable that process actually needs to occur.
And long COVID can be a fluctuating illness where you have periods of good days and bad days, or the symptoms might change. So you might need a different type of support in January than you do in May. So be collaborative with your employees and be responsive to their needs.
I just want to bring out a couple things from the chat before we get back to Andrew. One is Susan Cook. The panelists want you to know that they understand and feel bad for your situation when it comes to SSI and SSDI, and there are many bills that they hope to get approved. And then Renee, we will pass on your thoughts to Andrew and he'll get in touch. Renee is working on a program to train CHWs to help prevent and mitigate COVID, including long COVID, in the workplace. I think Andrew can certainly be helpful there as well. Andrew, before we wrap up, let me ask you this. If you had to put in a nutshell the seriousness of the problem of people in the workforce or out of the workforce trying to get benefits and hitting roadblocks, how would you characterize that, and what should they do?
I think that mostly goes back to a lack of awareness and understanding of the process. I think for some people, they say, well, I'm enrolled in disability benefits, and they think, well, they got diagnosed with long COVID, they can put that on their application and they'll get approved and they'll be okay. But in a lot of situations, in most situations, that doesn't happen, because that insurance company has an incentive to deny you your benefits, because that's how they make money. So I think people need to have a better understanding that they're really in charge of that whole process of making sure their application is submitted, making sure they have all the medical records they need to make a strong case for their disability, and then taking a lead on writing the appeal letter if their application gets denied, and then also going to visit specialists and continuing their care to continue to document their diagnosis and their limitations with doctors and specialists who are credible and understand their condition. Because what it's called is objective medical documentation that a lot of insurance companies ask for. And because of the nature of long COVID symptoms, it can be hard to document that objectively. There are some ways you can do it, but for the cognitive symptoms in particular, it's a big gray area. It's something you can really argue over about, what is the nature of that and how does that impair you?
Sam, I know you were shaking your head, and Ty, you as well. Go ahead, Sam.
So that was actually what I just chatted you about, John, is, I think one of the areas that potentially where I was successful in getting both sets of benefits was I was, really took an understanding to say, okay, if this is the symptom, I need to be very clear to whoever is reading this, whether it's the caseworker, to whomever, that how does this apply to my job or an ability to do any job? And I need to provide that translation. And I need to provide that translation and a reminder also to each one of my doctors. And I think this is something Carrie and I have also talked about. I started handing my resume to each one of my doctors, including the SSDI cognitive psychologist that did the exam for me. And I said, look, this is who I used to be, and this is the person that is sitting in front of you, just so they had the comparison. I wrote a letter with the help of my husband because, again, one of my disabilities is getting things out of my head and putting it into paper. I literally can only type on a little phone, if that makes any sense. And then it's still a roadblock to say, okay, has issues sitting and looking at a computer screen, which means cannot attend multiple Zoom meetings per day, is unable to work in Excel, is unable to do analytics, is unable to do, which are all the key pieces of my job. If you're, Carrie, she's not a desk job. So those things.
I was actually half and
half. You were a desk job, you were half and half. So
but I couldn't do it at all.
Something like that. And she could say, I also have chronic fatigue, which means I can't be on my feet for long hours. So it's translating the symptom into the why it makes it hard for you to do your job. Your doctor cannot do that translation for you because they see so many people a day, 15 minutes a person. They need your help.
Right.
Yeah.
And also too, my disability was cut, for no reason, even if I have documentation from my physician. So it's never guaranteed. And that's a process that needs to correct.
Richard in the chat pointed out that he has his consumers do a diary of their symptoms to track and document. Ty, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, there's certainly a longer discussion. There's a socioeconomic cruelty to long COVID, and that Sam and I are able to go to Mayo Clinic. I go to a long COVID clinic that has benefited me in documentation of my disability. And that's not a luxury that unfortunately many friends of mine, I know two women that are living in tents they can't afford to hire a lawyer. And I guess that's where I've been plugging pandemic patients. It's that, you know, we all need that help. So I think there's and people have given up on, you know, getting better. I certainly haven't, but going and finding and being an advocate for yourself to find the right doctors, that documentation will help you in that disability journey.
No, and I think also, Ty, I saw a note that you put that we could do so much more time on deeper dives on all of this. And I think I speak for the audience when I say that we will definitely, you know, there is a desire to do more on this topic. I mean, I've hosted hundreds of virtual events in my time. I don't think I've ever had one where not one person dropped off that started with us, especially in an hour long. So I mean, a lot of people are interested here. They need help. They need you all to continue telling your stories. And Andrew, they need, you know, legal assistance as well, which I know is what you provide. I will let you close this out, Andrew, by talking just very briefly about the fundraising campaign, which is unique because, you know, all of the money goes to helping people get their benefits. And so, Andrew, I'll let you talk us through that briefly, and hopefully put a link in the chat for the audience.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, John, for leading this conversation today. And thank you so much for our panelists. I really enjoyed hearing your stories and diving deeper into those and hearing about how big of an impact pandemic patients have had on your life, which is the whole reason that this organization exists. And so to our attendees right now, we are in our year-end fundraising campaign that we are running through December 31st. And our goal is to raise $150,000 so that we can bring more staff on board to provide direct support to long COVID patients who need help getting their disability benefits. So I'll post a link in the chat to our fundraising page. You can learn more there. You can donate specifically to one of our panelists here to say, you know, their story resonated with you more than the others, or you want them to be number one on that leaderboard spot. But it's all going to the same mission that we think is great, which is providing those support and services to long COVID patients. So also, as part of that fundraising campaign, we are collecting video responses where people can share their stories about what they're going through and how this has affected them. So there's also a link I posted in the chat to where you can see all of the prompts we've released for the questions we're asking people to respond to. And we're releasing a new one each week through the end of our campaign. So make sure you check back on that page and subscribe to our mailing list to make sure you receive those when we publish new ones. So we would love it if you could make a tax-deductible donation to pandemic patients using the link that I'm putting in the chat now. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's webinar. I think this was just a really great conversation. I learned a lot, even though I do this every day. I hope you learned a lot too. And I hope we can continue working together on providing support to long COVID patients.
And thank you to Richard for posting on Facebook to support pandemic patients. And Erica, we'll close it out with your question, if that's okay, Andrew, which is a great one. How can we as a community bring more awareness to long COVID in order to help more? I'll answer from my viewpoint first. And I would say, Erica, follow pandemic patients on social media, because there's so many compelling stories. And I feel like the more stories that get out there of everyday people who are suffering through this, to me, that is one thing that can definitely bring awareness. Sam, do you have thoughts?
I agree with that. I think the more that people talk about long COVID, just everyday people talk about long COVID, it'll force our politicians to say the words long COVID, which means more likely that bills will be passed supporting long COVID patients. And I think that will put pressure, and that's just critical. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. I agree with Sam. You know, it's just a matter of, and not all long COVID looks one way, or it could be mild. So I think that even that early conversation in general with your provider or whatever is something that to raise awareness or actually just get it on your chart or get it out that, more people are suffering than actually realize. And it's something that really needs to be talked about more.
And also, we're accessible and available too on social media. If you have questions or want to reach out to us, we're here for you too. It's our way to pay it forward.
Exactly.
You have been very gracious about deferring time to the young ladies that are with us. So we're going to let you have the final word, Ty.
Well, I did win the bet.
You won the bet
on if the sales guy and me would talk more than the others. I wanted everyone to have their equal share. I think there's a lot of, and Erica, thank you for that question. It's good to see your name. I think there's a lot of ways you can advocate, and starting with understanding, friends, family that might get COVID. There's legislation that's being put forward to help with long COVID research, long COVID advocacy. There's certainly Social Security reform. Advocacy is a broad term, but it shows up in many forms. I know, my run blog turned recovery blog turned recovery Twitter. That's where I do all my advocacy work, and probably yet another long conversation that we couldn't quite cover today, but it also, shows up in your vote. Make sure who you're voting for understands long COVID. There's some Ayanna Presley is one of a few actually in Congress that is a huge advocate for long COVID, and that would also be another good area to focus on.
All right. Well, thank you to our panelists for their amazing stories, unfortunate stories. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to pandemic patients. Most of all, thank you to the audience for helping us spread the word about long COVID and about what you can do to help. And stay tuned, because like I said, I'm sure we will have a follow-up event to this, because there's so many questions that people have. But for now, we hope everybody has a good evening and a good weekend. And please spread the word about long COVID and about pandemic patients. And the salesperson in Thai says, please give money as well.